Good afternoon. It's Monday and I'm back again. And I've got my three silent partners with me. Behind me over here I have, I guess he's over my other shoulder, Billy Bones, relaxing in the big chair. And then just to my right, I guess, I've got Sammy Skull, and then I've got Walter the Ghost up here too. So Walter and Sammy and Billy are here. They won't say a word, but it's comforting to know you have friends, no matter how mysterious or ephemeral they may be. The story. Well, in the story, the last time we talked, Chief Petrovic had been down to talk to Johnny Polizzi and Ernie Stanzio again, and he'd found out from that conversation that evidently the killer was Nancy Featherston. She had murdered Henny, and she had murdered and chopped up her parents, and at least he's 99% certain of that. And of course, you'll recall from a little earlier that Joel and Georgie were out talking to the ghost or essence of Henny, and that's where they found out the very same thing. Well, it's one thing to say that she murdered them, but it's another thing to prove it. This was 1933, not the year 2000 or 1990 or 2010. The forensics were not available to even prove that the cut up bodies were those of her parents. So, despite the fact that Petrovic is convinced she's the killer, despite the fact that he thinks she's taken the name of the young woman she murdered, and she's now calling herself Henny and is living in the States, despite all these things, where's his actual proof? He doesn't have much. I suppose he has some circumstantial evidence. The only proof he might have would be the word of Polizzi and Stanzio. That's great, isn't it? Two known hoods. They're your key witnesses. Not going to be an easy case to win, if it ever becomes a case. The other problem he is faced with is he doesn't know where Nancy or A.K.A Henny is. She's in the States somewhere, and she's been there, well, since maybe 1911. She's become a citizen, most likely, of the States, and the only way they would get her back would be to extradite her. Good luck. Where is he going to get sufficient information, proof that she's the killer that would result in extradition? He's desperate. His constables are desperate. They need to come up with a plan. So they're having a meeting, and at that meeting, they're talking, and he says, we have a real problem here. We need to do some thinking if we're going to figure out how we're going to locate Henny Allenby, A.K.A Nancy Featherston, and somehow we need to get her back to Canada. That's when one of his constables came up with an idea. And it turned out here that Jay Jarvis says, you know, I saw a story in the Toronto Evening Telegram. A lawyer was appointed an executor to an estate, and they had to put a story in the paper. Well, Petrovic's saying, well, what's this got to do with our problem? And the constable knows he can't say anything back, so he just waits until the chief calms down a bit and says, it was a sizable estate, and the two of the people named in the will couldn't be located. They evidently had been boyhood chums of the person who died. So the lawyer gave the names to the newspaper and said if they came forward and could provide proof of who they were, they would receive their share of the estate. I think we have to do something like that. Petrovic says, hey, that's a great idea. It's a great idea. So he said, well, we've got to create the story, and I don't want to be putting lies in the newspaper, so I can't just say that unless it has some basis in truth. So I want one of you to investigate this, talk to the lawyer, find out whether Henny Allenby was left anything in the will of the Featherstons. So they look into it. And a couple of days later, they find out that there was a bequest to Henny Allenby in the will of $1,000. Now today, $1,000 wouldn't be a lot of money. But at that time in 1933, it would be a lot of money. It would be something well worth collecting. So they have a meeting, they say, okay, now we know that there's something in the will, we can put something in the paper. And Jay had drafted a proposal to what to put in the paper, and here it is. This is what they're suggesting. So he hands it out, and it says, inheritance bequest, missing heir. That's the byline. There is a significant financial inheritance available for Henrietta Harriet Allenby. She arrived in Canada in May 1901 as part of the British Home Child Program. To qualify for the inheritance, Henrietta Harriet Allenby must present herself to the law firm of Wilson, Tome and Johnson at 186 Yonge Street, Toronto. Proof of identification is required. Well, they all read that and they thought, Jay, that's pretty good. That'll work. And so it's taken and it's given to the Toronto Evening Telegram and 3 of the leading newspapers in Illinois, because that's where they suspect Nancy Featherstone, A.K.A Henny Allenby, has gone. Well, here we are now, a week later. The notification of this amount of money has been put in the newspapers. Let's see what's happening now. So this is now Tuesday, April the 4th, and we're looking at what's happening in Springfield, Illinois. I'm going to read some of this to you. Henny McCann. McCann, not Allenby. Henny McCann opened her front door, entered her foyer, took off her light jacket and hat and put them in the front closet. Then she sat down on the deacon's bench and removed her boots and put on her slippers. It was a little after 4 o'clock, and she just returned to the bank. It was a very pleasant day this early in April. She planned to spend a quiet evening at home. After supper, she and her housekeeper Millie would discuss plans for the party that Henny was hosting Saturday night. For the moment, she just wanted a cup of tea and a Chicago Tribune. She was tired from her walk. She could hear Millie fussing in the kitchen, busy preparing supper. Henny sat down in her favorite chair in the living room and rang the little bell that was on the small end table placed beside her chair. Millie quickly appeared with a cup of tea and 2 freshly baked cookies. She placed the small tray on the table and quickly left the room to get back to supper preparations. Henny relaxed, sat back, and opened the Chicago Tribune. She turned to the society page first. She had an active social life and attended most of the social parties. She had cut way back on the drugs and alcohol from her earlier years, but she still enjoyed a good party. Henny was not extremely wealthy, but she was well off. She had married Dr. Frank McCann in 1914. At that time, he had been a prominent Chicago surgeon and had many wealthy and influential friends. He had died very suddenly, about 3.5 years after their marriage. Even despite his early demise, Henny remained popular with the Chicago establishment. His family had a history of heart trouble, so there was no inquest into his death. Frank McCann had left Henny set comfortably for the rest of her life. Sounds suspicious to me. Henny turned to the front page next. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who had become the first American president's wife to hold her own press conferences, told reporters yesterday that beer would be served at the White House as soon as Prohibition ended. Mrs. Roosevelt emphasized that she did not drink alcohol, but it would be available to guests of the president. Spring training was just winding down for the Cubs and the White Sox, so the front page also had a short story predicting each team's chances of having a successful season. Last year, the Cubs had won the National League pennant with 90 wins and 64 losses, but they lost the World Series to the Yankees in 4 straight games. Great things were predicted for the Cubs. The White Sox were coming off a terrible season where they'd only won 49 games. It was the worst season in the history of the team, and dire predictions abounded for the 1933 season. It was still a few minutes till supper time, so Henny started to scan some of the other pages and in the Tribune, and then she noticed a small article at the bottom of one of the pages. It was titled "Missing Heir." As she read through the short notice, she became more and more excited. She'd heard a story from one of her acquaintances in Rockford about a young man this other woman knew who suddenly been notified his uncle had died and that he was the only heir. The man had returned to England and had become quite prosperous as the owner of a hat manufacturing company. It sounded a bit like a fairy tale, but these things happened. Henny A.K.A., formerly Henry Allenby, but really Nancy Featherston, believed that she led a charmed life. She was always in favor of getting more money. There were a couple of minor inconveniences, of course. She would have to go to Canada, but she'd been there several times in the past 10 years. She'd visited Toronto 4 times and Montreal several times as well. She would also have to prove that she was Henny Allenby. She could do that. When she disposed of Henrietta Harriet Allenby, she'd taken all her personal belongings. That included her identifications. In particular, it included the paperwork that had been filled out when Henny entered Canada. Henny had a party Saturday night to get ready for first, and so that was the business she was involved in for the next little while. She was having a lot of important people there, even the mayor and his wife. There'd be live entertainment provided by a 3-piece band and a talented local singer. Once that party was out of the way, Henny planned to travel to Toronto to collect her bequest. She would have Millie contact the train station first thing tomorrow to arrange first-class travel from Springfield to Chicago, then from Chicago to Detroit, and finally from Detroit to Toronto. If she left Springfield early Monday, she should be in Toronto sometime later in the day on Tuesday. Wednesday morning, she'd visit the offices of Wilson, Tome, and Johnson on Yonge Street to collect her inheritance. Oh, she was so pleased with herself. She led such a charmed life. That's the next section of the story completed. Henny, I guess, is returning to Canada. If she could hear me, I'd say, you better watch out. Okay? Take care. Talk to you in a week.